Live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to the Mint Extra. Our discussion this afternoon, International Day for Poverty Eradication, acting together to achieve social and environmental justice for all. Hello, I'm Andy Hodges. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network ZTN and our partners, the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, PRFT, and the United Nations. If you have any comments or views on our show today, as usual, please contact us via our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, or via our Twitter handle @ZTN News. The 17th of October of every year is the United Nations International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. The Sustainable Development Goals number 1, or SDG 1, also calls for an end to poverty in all its forms everywhere. Through Resolution 47/196, adopted on the 22nd of December 1992, the United Nations General Assembly declared 17 October as the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty and invited all states to devote the day to presenting and promoting, as appropriate in their national context, concrete activities with regard to the eradication of poverty and destitution. This year's theme is Acting Together to Achieve Social and Environmental Justice for All. The growing recognition of the multidimensionality of poverty means that these two issues are inseparably intertwined, and that social justice cannot be fully realized without aggressively rectifying environmental injustices at the same time. Joining us on the Mint Extra this afternoon to discuss International Day for Poverty Eradication, acting together to achieve social and economic justice for all, we are joined in the studio by Georges van Montfort, UNDP Resident Representative, Sekai Kubarika, CEO at the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, Reverend Taylor Nyanhete, National Director, Zimbabwe National Council for the Welfare of Children, ZNCWC. And joining us virtually is Washington Jakata, Director of Climate Change, Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Climate and Rural Resettlement. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mint Extra.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you.
Georges, what is the United Nations International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, and what does it mean for Zimbabwe, particularly looking at this year's theme?
I think it's a very important day for us all to rededicate ourselves to fighting poverty. It's often forgotten that that is one of the most important goals that we want to achieve. And as you said, so poverty in its broadest form, not just income poverty, but poverty also meaning in terms of access to education, access to health, access to well-being for all people. And I think why it's important now, as we've seen with COVID, we're actually in an unprecedented time globally, where for the first time since we started recording human development, it's going back. We're reversing in human development. In fact, some of the levels are back to where we were in 1980s, the mid-1980s. So all of that gains, the development gains we made as a world, as nations of this world, are being reversed by COVID. So I think it's a clarion call to all of us to recognize poverty for what it is, as I said, and also recognizing the theme, the links between environment and social, between the people and the planet. I think we completely overshot that. COVID is a stark reminder of that, both the developed and the developing world. And therefore this day, more so now than ever, is an important day for us to rededicate ourselves to that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, in terms of the poverty eradication, because of COVID, as you said, we've taken a step backwards. So all the gains, and I think it probably makes SDG 1 even harder to achieve in a way. I mean, hopefully governments will catch up, but it obviously does put a dent on some of the efforts they've made towards SDG 1.
A massive pressure on SDG 1, but also as a result of that on the other SDGs. And moreover, as you see what COVID's impact on the industry, and I'm glad we have somebody from the industries here, that is a longer term threat. The threat on education, for example, is not a threat for today, it's a threat for the next generation. The fact that children do not have access to education is something we may not see the impact of today, but we will see in the future. So it is a fundamental threat to human development.
We're now joined virtually by Washington Jakata. He's the Director of Climate Change, Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Climate and Rural Resettlement. Washington, again, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, Washington, with reference to Resolution 47/196, adopted on the 22nd of December 1992, which I mentioned in my opening remarks, what concrete activities is Zimbabwe carrying out to present and promote the eradication of poverty and destitution in the country?
It all starts with policies and strategies that the country is put into place and is implementing also some of the initiatives that are aimed towards the eradication of poverty. One of the main challenges that the country is facing is related to climate change. So in order for us to become a climate resilient nation, it means once we attain resilience, then it ties in very well with poverty eradication. And we now have a climate policy and the National Climate Change Response Strategy in place that is operational, which has been guiding us to develop and implement various projects that are now in the country to build the capacities, build the resilience, the adaptive capacity of communities to address the issues of climate change. We have got the Green Climate Fund, which is one of the major funds, which will be a window to assist in financing resilience projects and programs towards the eradication of poverty, especially which is climate change induced. And so we've managed to successfully apply for some of these funds from the Green Climate Fund. And the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund is also one avenue that is working towards ensuring that communities become climate resilient. And automatically with climate resilience, there are elements of poverty reductions. At the government level, in its entirety, dam construction is been accelerated, building of construction of wells, resuscitation of irrigation schemes, and also raising awareness on practical interventions has also been ongoing with the introduction of the latest technologies along the lines of climate smart agriculture, which is referred to as Pfumvudza, which has been very well articulated by the presidency, and the Minister of Agriculture is ensuring that all corners of the country really adopt this, which will result in enhanced agricultural productivity under the changing climate, and also not cause harm to the climate itself.
So, Washington, let me understand. So, in a way, you're saying that, you know, obviously, as you said, we are prone to rain, so to speak, or the climate, particularly in terms of food security. You think that if we're climate-proofed or we have climate-resistance policies, that, of course, will help in a way, it's partly eradicate poverty in certain areas due to, of course, the sufficiency of people to eat and be able to grow their own food. Is that a true statement?
Definitely so. Once we are climate-proofed, it works towards poverty eradication, as we are now even in the process of integrating climate change in development planning. So it's something, and also in treasury and budgeting, so that we already start being more of a proactive nation rather than being a reactive nation. Then it means we put in place strategies and plans, actions that will ensure that we become resilient, that will ensure that communities really are empowered to be self-sufficient. And the self-sufficiency comes with its elements of poverty reduction. Okay,
that's interesting there, Reverend. You heard Washington's comments there. Starts with policies and strategies at a lower level, of course, to eradicate poverty. Also, he said that one of the biggest dangers or biggest threats to Zimbabwe is climate change, and the government's putting in place national climate change responses so that at least we can feed ourselves, or at least put up dams, weirs, so our people can actually feed themselves. And of course, Zimbabwe has accessed money from the Green Climate Fund to finance resilience projects, particularly around climate change. But I want to talk about your organization, Reverend, ZNCWC. Its mission, of course, is to be the leader of child rights sector through various means, for example, coordination, capacity building, advocacy, research, resource mobilization, etc. But it's interesting in that, how prevalent is poverty, especially amongst children? Because that is the thrust, I think, of your organization in Zimbabwe.
Yes, it is quite prevalent. And you only have to see children working and living on the streets. It's a sign that there is poverty out there, because ordinarily children are not supposed to be on the streets. They are supposed to be within families and well protected. So it's clear that the poverty levels are high, and given that a lot of parents or guardians are in informal employment, which presents challenges on its own, because the income is dependent on you waking up every day and going to work informally. So if you don't work on that day, you don't get any income. Unlike formal employment, where you can take off, informally you can't. So it's what you make that day that makes you survive. We've seen a lot of children coming into vending to also augment income for families.
Because the parents are not being able to make enough money to feed the entire family.
Yes. So, yeah.
But that also has an impact, doesn't it? Because it means the children then probably aren't going to school, they can't afford to go to school. So it's a perpetuating situation, is it not?
It is. We've also done a study that showed that there has been an increase in school dropouts for children because of the demand for fees, and also we've also seen children involved in sexual exploitation because of that, of dropping out of school. Parents cannot afford. So it's clear. One example that we know, we've seen children sexually exploited for an empty bottle of Coke.
Goodness.
To sell. You can imagine, 20 cents, 30 cents, and the child is sexually exploited. What does that mean for the future of that child?
So, Guy, let me bring you in from a business perspective. How can poverty be eradicated in the country? As I said, from a business perspective, can this be done through such things as job creation, food self-sufficiency, for example? And can business help in this regard?
Thank you very much, Andy. I do believe that the economic well-being of a nation is really at the heart of the well-being of its people. And business plays a critical role in driving the wheels of the economy, if you may, and then creating incomes and jobs that then translate into poverty eradication for our people. So clearly, yes, it is important that business is able to expand, that business is able to create jobs, that we are able to grow our businesses so that we can actually contribute to poverty eradication. I would say that, without business, then the country has no capacity to create the economic value that can be translated into social provisions or into the provisions of basic needs like health and education, water, energy for the population. So I do see the centrality of business, and personally I do feel that most of our efforts at eradicating poverty has not really included business as a key catalyst to the effort to eradicate poverty. I do notice that a lot of the interventions are sort of outside of business interventions, and I think that we would derive quite a lot of value in trying to come up with poverty eradication strategies that recognize the centrality of business and economic activity, which can be translated to value for us.
So that's something that the CZI could pursue, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Please go ahead.
So yes, I just wanted to top up on Sekai that I think there's need for business now to move from the business as usual manufacturing into also research and the development. Because the current situation is there are so many, I would say, materials or the ET products that we import, and they become so expensive in the country. And once they become expensive in the country, it really drains down on the communities, resulting in perhaps increased poverty levels. But if we manage to have the industry linking up with the innovation hubs at universities doing research and producing most of these products that we are importing. We will have products that are easily accessible as well as affordable, and it raises the income levels of the communities, resulting in perhaps playing a role in poverty reduction.
Thank you. We are going to have to take a breather, but just to recap, Washington was saying that there's a need for business to move from business as usual to more R&D, because of course you can then have import substitution, make cheaper products locally than the products that they bring in, which are expensive as imports. And I think he's calling for 100% what you're saying. He's supporting what you're saying in the sense of business working together with all the stakeholders to try and eradicate poverty. We now have to take a breather. You're watching The Mint Extra, our discussion this afternoon, International Day for Poverty Eradication, acting together to achieve social and environmental justice for all. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network, ZTN, and our partners, the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust and the United Nations. Now, next segment, we ask, what is the link between social and environmental justice? And what are the Zimbabwe government's poverty eradication policies and programs responding to climate and environmental related impacts? Don't go away. The Mint Extra will be right back. Welcome back. This is the Mint Extra. Our discussion this afternoon, International Day for Poverty Eradication, acting together to achieve social and environmental justice. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network, ZTN, and our partners, the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, PRFT, and the United Nations. Georges, we do know that there is a link between the country's economic situation and the rising levels of poverty. The experiences, I think Sekai put that, as well as the Reverend, in terms of the linkages and how business should get more involved. So I'd like you to look at that, but I'd also like you to answer this. I mentioned earlier that social and environmental justice are inseparably intertwined. Can you expand on what exactly these are and why they are intertwined?
Thank you, Andy. So maybe first your question on sort of the economic situation of a country linked to an individual's poverty level. I think there's an undeniable link, right? A country that doesn't grow economically, by definition, and doesn't provide jobs, as Sekai has mentioned, by definition people stand a lesser chance of sort of increasing their income. At the same time, we must be cognizant, as we said, that income poverty is not the only poverty we're talking about. Right? So that's first and foremost. Poverty is in terms of access to education, access to health, access to well-being. So there's a lot of dimensions there. Secondly, what we've seen in many countries, and again, COVID has highlighted this in the developed world as well, inequalities are rising. So if your country is doing well, that doesn't mean that all your people are doing well. Right? So economic growth cannot and should not be the only measure of poverty, measure of well-being. I think so that's the first realization. Yes, it's an important factor, but it's not everything that we need to be looking at. And that's where the second part of your question comes into the social and environmental justice, right? So how do we make sure that we look at the economy, we look at the society, we look at the environment as three elements that need to come together and need to feed off each other, if I can use that term, but in a way that we don't have one predating on the other. Right? We need environment. It's very obvious in Zimbabwe, more so than in many countries, I would say, where if there's not enough rain, there's not enough food. If I don't have access to land, secure access to land, I can't invest in agriculture. Right? So there's an almost immediate link, which in some of the Western world is lost. Right? When you see drought, people don't expect not to have food in the supermarkets, because there's always a way in which the rest of the system adjusts. Here we're not in that. So here the links are much more obvious between sort of the society, the environment, and the economy And what we've seen now, even before COVID, what the SDGs are calling for is finding ways in which we live within those boundaries and make sure that the three actually come together and allow people to, and the environment, to thrive.
I like the point that you make, of course, because people do see poverty as economic, don't they, about income. But actually, we're here talking about a much broader spectrum of what is defined as. I mean, you mentioned things like health and education. I mean, Reverend, let me come to you on this one. You know, I think Georges makes the point there that, you know, we do see it as money, don't we? Poverty. A lot of people see it as that, but it actually, that's just a part of it.
Yes. Education on its own empowers people in any community. So when people are not getting that education, like we're seeing now in the lockdown, children are not going to school, as he indicated, it has an impact into the future, because when children go to school, it's an investment for a country, it's an investment for the family, it's an investment to the individual, because they're able to have choices. They're also able to understand even the climate change that we're struggling with now, because they'll be able to read, they'll be able to also access other sources of information. So it's important that children are made to understand that if they are to survive, they need to appreciate the environment that they live in. I've seen a lot of parents do not teach their children even where to throw paper, to throw waste, and even to understand that when they throw that waste anywhere, it has an impact on the environment. So these are issues around education that we need to continuously impact. So for me, children should be seen as an investment for a country and for the future.
Washington, let me come to you. You've heard the comments from the panelists. I'd like you to also possibly chip in there. But a question I have for you, it's believed that social justice cannot be fully realized without aggressively rectifying environmental injustices at the same time. What specifically are the Zimbabwe government's poverty eradication policies and programs responding to climate and environmental related impacts?
Actually, you see, this is like a circular economy, for example. We can be the ones who are chasing our own tail. In some cases, we cause the problem that eventually results in our demise. We degrade the land at our own expense, and we cut the trees. For example, we've got one of the major problems which people are relating to climate change alone, which is to do with the very violent storms, which are ripping off roofs of schools, houses. We blame building codes, among other issues. Yet they are caused also by forestry degradation. Forestry deforestation is just rampant, and the winds, they gather momentum freely to then rip off these roofs, and then we blame it on violent storms which are climate related. Yet we are the ones who are really doing it. We are doing gold panning in riverbeds. We are doing agricultural productivity also in riverbanks, and then eventually we have siltation, and we can't get water to sustain our lives, and also we can't get the water for irrigation, resulting in us being poorer. So there is need for a balance when it comes now to the issues of the society vis-a-vis the environment. And we need not to look at only the environment without looking at the impacts on the people. There should be an environmental approach that also accommodates and also creates options for the communities to be living in a sustainable manner. The Environmental Management Act itself is very clear on this. It touches on the issues of social and environmental safeguards to ensure that communities also are taken on board and also understood and assisted where possible as we move to address the issues of the environment. So this balance, it needs to be there without fail. Otherwise, you address the environment at the peril of the communities themselves.
But Washington, you talked about, for example, people digging in riverbeds, which of course sort of disturbs the water sources and so forth. And I think Reverend mentioned about education of children in terms of throwing away waste in the streets and the impact it has on the environment. But I mean, on the one side, you've got the gold panners, for example, who are trying to do that just to sustain a living, which I suppose can be related to the poverty or the economic situation they're in. And the other side, we're also talking about possibly either parental education or education at schools to teach them about the environment. So are there any sort of policies or training programs that the ministry is carrying out to try and get this message across about how the environment can be helped or saved by the actions that we take as citizens?
Yes, number one, the environmental and awareness campaigns by the Environmental Management Agency on sustainable utilization of natural resources is an ongoing process. Then under climate change agenda, we are right now in the process, as the country devolves, we are in the process of empowering and capacitating the provincial development committees and the district development committees to ensure that they factor in the issues of climate change, looking at the environment and ensuring that even when it comes to land use, the land use should be sustainable, ensuring that it doesn't harm the environment, because we settle people in flood-prone areas. At the same time, we want to also look for resources for them to be evacuated during flooding times, and we tend to use too much in terms of resources to react to situations, resources which we could use to empower the societies, to assist in preparing the communities, societies for perhaps these disasters early, rather than ourselves being reactive when these disasters come on board. So there are quite a number of activities that are ongoing within the ministry, and which, if we all follow them closely and adhere with what is being imparted, then we could come to a balance of some sort, a balance of the environment and social justice.
Thank you. Sakai, how is business playing its role in mitigating climate change impacts? I find it fascinating sometimes when I hear people around the world disowning climate change and actually saying it doesn't exist, which is another conversation, I think, for another day. But how is business impacting minimizing environmental degradation?
There are various initiatives in terms of minimizing environmental degradation. At CZI, we started a clean and green initiative for industry to begin to recognize some of those efforts and also initiate environmental initiatives in the industrial areas. I would say that in terms of waste disposal, companies have taken various initiatives to try and make sure that their systems are actually environmentally friendly and that they don't pollute a lot. And I really just wanted to focus on the recycling business because we are now having a little bit of increased participation by industry in recycling of waste, which rids the environment of unwanted waste or waste that could choke the heart of the environment, if you may. Some companies that are coming up are beginning to be built purely out of recycling. So we have an emerging and growing circular economy, which takes a lot of waste away from the environment. And I wanted to mention there's one young company that I actually visited yesterday, coincidentally. They are recycling PET bottles into strapping, which is used for bulk packaging, for strapping bricks, for the transportation of bricks and other various packaging applications. And so there are various initiatives. You are aware that scrap steel is recycled and used for manufacturing in the country. there's still a lot that needs to be done, and the building of a circular economy is also one area of development that industry would really need support in. I know that advanced economies have gone quite a long way in trying to mitigate this. We are also working on energy efficiency, promoting energy efficiency in enterprises as a way of reducing the energy consumption in factories and making them more energy efficient and energy smart as well. I would say those are some of the current efforts, but it's an area that that business really needs a lot more to be supported on.
We do have to take a breather, but I'd like to ask you more questions about that, particularly on the business perspective, and also you, George, in terms of the government's poverty eradication policies. But we now have to take a breather. You're watching the Mint Extra, our discussion this afternoon, International Day for Poverty Eradication, acting together to achieve social and environmental justice for all. This is live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust and the United Nations. Now, in our next segment, we ask, how is the country building the resilience of the poor and those in vulnerable situations? What is the role of civil society organizations? Don't go away. The Mint Extra will be right back.
Life will never be the same again.
Absolutely. How do you tell someone in Bari or in Soweto that they should exercise social distancing?
Every single one of us, barring a few, are praying more.
What is the health economic cost of what we are trying to achieve?
I don't know whether his chairman knows he runs at about 9 in the morning.
Yeah, I've just got the symptoms, so I just called the doctor and and then he just advised me to have to stay at home, eh?
Welcome back. You're watching the Mint Extra, our discussion this afternoon, International Day for Poverty Eradication, acting together to achieve social and environmental justice for all. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, PRFT, and the United Nations. Georges, I want to quote a report that was done by UN Women and the UNDP stating that the COVID-19 crisis will dramatically increase the poverty rate for women and widen the gap between men and women who live in poverty. The numbers are quite alarming. Poverty was supposed to reduce in women by 2.7% between 2019 and 2021, but now projections point to 9.1% due to the pandemic. Now, in Zimbabwe, similar trends of poverty are rising, meaning that the poor and those in vulnerable situations are bearing the brunt of social and environmental issues. What can be done to halt this trend by the government, private sector, individuals, and of course CSOs?
Yeah, and I think that's the exact question, right? That coalition needs to work and come together. And I think, as Sakai said, I think there was a lack of that maybe in the past. We're heartened to see that, for example, on the National Development Strategy, there is a deliberate attempt to reach out to the industries and get input from the industries to make sure that as those important players in society we come together. Because halting the trends, I mean, there's no silver bullet answer to this. And we've seen that globally, the hundreds of millions of people that will be thrown back into poverty, not just in Zimbabwe, but across the globe. So it shows that policies were not working. Right? The fact that inequality was rising before COVID shows that policies were not working globally. Here as well, in Zimbabwe is no exception to that. Policies were not working, partially because we didn't take into account those three elements, as we said, society, environment, and the economy needing to come together. So what do we need to do? I think first and foremost, those reports help, because we identify where are those pockets of vulnerability and how do we address the particular challenges that they face. We did a study on the informal markets. It's fascinating to see, once you look at data, what kind of then your answer changes from what your initial assumptions on what makes right policy is. And I think that's the whole point of bringing together the partners. And I would say shifting in Zimbabwe, one of the key challenges I see for government, for us as development partners, for industry, I think the shift from let's keep things going. The resilience building focus, which we don't need to move away from, towards one of development. We have been thrown back by drought, by economic reforms that were challenging and uneven. We've been thrown back and keep ourselves back into sort of a humanitarian response. Needing to feed people, it's almost like a corporate social responsibility if I take the industry as an example. That cannot be the model of development of a country. I recognize it's needed because that's where we are, but we need to find a way in which we can continue to have that lens on Vision 2030 for Zimbabwe, the SDGs for the world, where we're saying we are investing in development and developing this country whilst we're addressing the challenges that we're facing today. It's a hard nut to crack for any government.
But it's something that we have to work towards if we want to be successful.
Exactly.
Jointly. Sakai, I'll come to you then. I'll go to Washington and come to you, Reverend. Sakai, there's been a lot of reports from business, for example, dumping effluents or waste from their factories into rivers or dumping it into unsafe environments underground and so forth. And of course, the EMA, Environmental Management Agency, is supposed to helpfully monitor business and see that some of these practices are not done. Is there any self-regulation? I mean, what can business do for those companies, particularly those who are flouting environmental laws and really just willy-nilly dumping their waste wherever it may be?
I wanted to respond to what George has said first, and then I'll come back to your question. I just wanted to again reiterate the centrality of the economy, of the well-being of an economy in fighting poverty. A lot of times we find that we speak about a lot of the dimensions of poverty, and we talk about distribution and inequalities, but it's an easier conversation to have when the economy is firing on all cylinders. So what we really need to guard jealously is that we have an economy that is on a sustained growth trajectory. That is really, really critical. And my call to our development colleagues is that I believe that part of the interventions and support that comes into a country and into an economy like this one must also recognize the need for business rescue packages. Otherwise we are stuck in the humanitarian approach, which is really short term, and the impact of humanitarian assistance is not sustained impact because it's relief, you understand. So I think it's also critical that the development partners, as we now work towards working together, avail some of their assistance, not just to immediate relief, but also to business rescue, recognizing that the country has limitations in terms of what business can access, in terms of capital, in terms of working capital, or even the limitations that we may have in attracting investment into the country. Why can't we have that kind of support? We really need to be sort of coming up with customized approaches for an economy like this one. I don't believe that there's a country that has succeeded or registered economic prosperity at the back of a growing informal sector. So, for us, the informality is an unintended consequence of the economic decline that the country has been experiencing. So it is important that we have support to sustain and to begin to grow again the formal sector. And, when you're in the informal sector, you can see that people are able to look after themselves. But it's very individual, it's almost subsistence entrepreneurship, if you may, which is meant to feed myself and my family. And but what we desire is something that has a larger multiplier effect to the economy and to the creation of jobs and livelihoods, where revenue can be generated and given to the fiscus so that some of these social amenities and basic needs can also be addressed.
Okay.
So I think it's time that the partnership between business and development becomes even stronger.
And very briefly, this comment about business that is flouting EMA or environmental laws, is that something that you're worried about as business?
Yes, we have heard about this, but I don't want to delve into that. Why? Because if you look at the effluent disposal mechanisms, there are different players there. So, you know, there's effluent disposal infrastructure, and, you know, municipalities and others do come into play. It's not entirely the responsibility of business. So without analyzing that whole ecosystem that deals with waste disposal, whether in industry or elsewhere, it's difficult to then say business is willy-nilly doing these things.
Okay, thank you. Washington, let me bring you in here. I'd like you to comment, if you can, briefly in terms of the EMA and its role in terms of safeguarding the environment. But also one thing that you mentioned earlier, you mentioned about the process of empowering provincial and district development committees to factor in climate change. Would it be a suggestion to say that you could link those policies of these committees into money given to them unless they do follow environmental policies at the district and provincial level? Is that an option that can be considered?
Well, it could be considered, yes. But I wanted to comment also on the business aspect, the private sector, that we need to move slightly away from only solving the symptoms of poverty, and also move into the causes themselves, which can be external, global, and among other issues. You know, in the past 10 years, we've experienced more than 5 droughts here in Zimbabwe, which are climate change related. This is the climate change itself has been caused by industry, and the industry needs to play a very significant role in ensuring that we also reduce the rate at which climate is changing. We did a survey of energy and water use efficiency in Zimbabwe in some of the 10 major industries here, and we observed that there was very serious inefficiency in energy and the water use, and the companies themselves were very glad to notice and also to observe where they were falling short. And so we need the industry really to ensure that they play their role, and also to account for actions which they are doing that result in environmental degradation, which can also be one of the causes for poverty itself.
Okay.
So externally, even sanctions themselves, like those imposed on Zimbabwe, are also contributing towards increasing poverty levels in the country. So poverty on its own, we need also to look at the causes and see how we could holistically address these issues. Even as we go to the provinces and districts, we need really to have a nexus, a synthesis of all these, both the symptoms and the causes, and we try to address both.
Thank you. And the major issue there, Sakai, as Washington was saying, is business to play its part and to also make sure that the laws are followed. Reverend, I'd like to bring you in here. We talked about local authorities, and I think you wanted to make a comment on that, if you could.
Yes. For me, local authorities, they've not really come into the picture around waste management, climate change, because up to now, at family level, people don't know how to dispose waste in terms of glass, plastic. There's no way you just throw things willy-nilly. You're not even able to say this goes in this bag, this goes in that. If I want to dispose glass, I can take it to that place where it can be done safely. And I think it's the role of a local authority to do that. They're not investing much in the communities that they serve as residents. So I think local authorities need to play a critical role. They're also in an area where there are lots of children in schools, and they're not coming into those institutions to ensure that they empower these children on how climate change is affecting the city, it's affecting the environment, and how using the children's innovative minds can play a role in ensuring that we reduce poverty among ourselves as people.
I mean, it's back to what George is saying. It is a combined effort, isn't it, Reverend?
Yes.
You know, we cannot say business stand alone, CSO stand alone, government stand alone. The policies must be integrated so that everyone is following them, everyone is applying them for the good of all the people.
Yeah, but also there has to be a framework for us to come together and also a monitoring mechanism to check whether everyone is playing his or her role in that space. If it's business, how is it playing? If it's civil society, how at family level or community level, how are they coming in to ensure that we all understand that we are a part of the whole?
Georges, and I also want to bring Sakai into this question. Commentators have said that, in terms of CO2 emissions, for example, which of course the ozone layer and so forth, a lot of this was done by Western countries, industrialization over many decades. And now Africa, which is starting to slowly industrialize, for example, we still use coal, and of course coal is being phased out as too environmentally polluting. The commentators are saying that the Western world is trying to sort of inhibit Africa's growth by imposing environmental policies on us, which they themselves never followed for the last 200-300 years. Your comment to that?
Well, yes, that's an argument, but I would say it's an old argument.
Okay.
It's an argument that China used in many of the negotiations, that they should have been allowed the space to pollute generally, because they were economically growing, and I think Africa was riding on that same wave. But if you look, things have changed dramatically. China is changing dramatically, right? Most of the solar is now actually investment from China. And so if you look at, I was reading an article today, World Economic Forum, solar energy is now at the lowest price. It's cheaper than coal, cheaper than fossil fuels, so why are we investing? It's sort of, the logic has reversed, right? In a way where in the beginning we would say renewable energies, as an example, unreliable, costly, let's just keep our coal-fired power stations burning. We're now in a phase where actually if we're looking at investing in energy, in Zimbabwe for example, solar is your cheaper option. So the logic of let us pollute because we've earned the right, because we haven't contributed to greenhouse gas emissions to your level, I think it's no longer the case. So we can grow economically, and I agree with you, we can grow economically without detrimenting our environment.
Sakai, I think one thing we haven't talked about as opposed to business is the cost of this, because it isn't cheap to move from, say, coal-fired plants and so forth to new environmentally friendly. I mean, there is an initial quite a large cost, and I mean, is business ready for that? I mean, our business already needs retooling. Some of the equipment's 30 years old, some of the equipment probably doesn't meet environmental standards in some of the business operations. Is this affordable? Can business actually effectively change their operations to take into account environmental issues?
I agree, it's a huge capital requirement for a lot of businesses, and it's not immediately available to most businesses because they just can't afford it. And the financing options again seem to be limited for various reasons. We are aware of a few businesses that have installed solar in their enterprises, but sometimes at a huge cost out of their own pocket, and sometimes financing arrangements with the companies that are providing these services. There are a few companies that have now emerged in the solar business that are doing commercial installations in industry. But what I've also heard from some of the industrialists is that, they can get solar, but because of their capacity, like factory level installations, which are not far afield from the industries, they're saying that they won't be able to generate enough for their plants. They will probably be able to generate enough to run some of their operations, but they can't run the plant.
I think the mid-level solar power could be as much as $2 million. I mean, that's not a very large one, and these are some of the numbers that we looked at.
Exactly, yeah. So I think the biggest impediment there is really financing, which is again where maybe development financing could assist in getting businesses to adopt clean energy solutions, if you may.
Washington, I want to just, there's a couple of questions I want to ask you. I think you've heard what the panelists said. We're talking about energy efficiency. I know recently the Zimbabwe government said, if I'm not mistaken, that any new housing projects should be built with solar. And of course, the government launched recently a renewable energy policy. So I'd like you to comment on that. And also, is Zimbabwe effectively building the resilience of the poor and those in vulnerable situations? And how would you say that we are doing that? Are poverty eradication initiatives inclusive?
This is it's actually a complex, approach to poverty eradication, and with the business also getting onto the fold, these issues really they need to be handled together. I've already talked about some of the policies that are on the ground, including the presidential input, the Fumbuza, which is incapacitating farmers, and the resuscitation of irrigation systems right now, which is on full force, and even the acquisition of irrigation equipment from Brazil and other countries, from Belarus, tractors for draft power. All these will capacitate the people and will assist. But I wanted to touch on the industry, that probably what is there is we still haven't penetrated into industry to raise awareness on what is available on the market. If you look, there is the biggest climate fund, which is called the Green Climate Fund, which can be accessed by industries, really at very soft loans, which are meant for climate, for industries to transform their industrial production into green production. And also the World Bank from 2021 will have a 200 billion facility for access by industries in developing world to go green, to go into energy efficiency, renewable energies, among others. And these are soft loans meant for climate change. So it means we need really to talk more with the industry so that they get to become aware of this, because you talked about phasing out of coal, and this is coming. It has been announced. The Secretary General of UN last year announced, and they called upon all countries to stop designing, developing, establishing any new coal-fired generation, electricity generation systems. And so we need to be together, because you'll be one time found on the wrong side of the road.
Washington, may I ask? A lot of the ministry's policies or initiatives appear to be around the issue of food sufficiency and drought proofing, and making sure at least that vulnerable citizens at least can feed themselves, and hopefully, with a bit of luck, contribute obviously some of their produce into the marketplace. But Georges did raise earlier the issues of health, education, and how these do have a social impact, of course, and environmental impact on citizens. So can you expand a little bit, and briefly if you can, on what the ministry is doing on those other issues in terms of trying to link them in, as the panelists have been saying, to make it one holistic whole?
Well, the other one issue which is very critical is awareness. Information is power, it's knowledge, and it's security. We are raising awareness countrywide on these issues, environmental, social, and climate change. And we are also conducting demonstration projects, pilot projects, to demonstrate the possibility of communities also enhancing their agricultural productivity in various aspects, in their area, depending on the circumstances, the nature of the climate in their area, the types of crops they can grow, and so forth. We have developed a climate smart agriculture manual, which really articulates these issues very, very clearly. And right now, it's already being disseminated, rolled out countrywide in all the agricultural colleges to the farmers and among other areas. And environmentally, of course, the EMA, Forestry Commission, Parks and Wildlife are on a drive to see how to empower people and reveal the opportunities that people can have alternative sources of income, which can also assist in alleviating poverty.
All right, thank you. Reverend, we're now coming to that budget season in Zimbabwe, the 2021 budget. In fact, the minister had a pre-budget launch this morning, and the budget hopefully should be coming out sometime in November. In your opinion, do you see any opportunities and gaps that should be put into the 2021 budget to address issues of social and environmental justice in Zimbabwe?
Yes, there is opportunity particularly encouraging young people, including children, to be innovative, to create the spaces where they can engage. I think we have not done enough in terms of child participation, even in the budget consultations. Government has to appreciate the fact that they cannot no longer do any programming without the children being involved themselves. And not only being involved, but ensuring that the ideas or contributions that they make are put into action. And continuously engage them, because so that they appreciate that whatever they say is considered and put into action.
So if they
by
buy
the
in,
state.
they'll be able to then follow it through. You need the buy-in of everybody as well, not just impose policies on them.
Yes, they need to come in and have a buy-in. And that has to be a deliberate effort by government. Because at times we think we can think for children. It's no longer the case. The children can think for themselves.
Yeah, that is true. I think we all as parents can attest to that. Georges, the same sort of question to you. Can you see any gaps, and I'm sorry I have to be brief because we are coming to the end, but any opportunities and gaps that you would probably recommend could be put into the 2021 budget to look at these social and environmental issues?
Yeah, so one, I think, a continued focus on social protection. I think we've all seen that there's a layer of the population that really needs that support, and development partners can help, but government needs to lead there. But I think at the same point, what Zakai mentioned, creating that business environment in which business can thrive. So it's not taking over from business, but creating an environment. Maybe it's indeed looking at financing for electricity and those kind of elements, which allows business to play the role that it normally would play.
Okay, Zakai, a comment on this. You know, we were there together at the budget pre-budget meeting this morning. Anything that you could see that could be put into the budget 2021 that could help these issues, or at least start on the process of eradicating? I mean, we talked earlier about how we've taken a step backwards in eradicating poverty. Anything that you can see that we should put into the 2020 budget recommendations?
I have one recommendation that I wanted to make, and this is really in light of, if you look at the post-COVID era and some of the constraints that we have faced, and the constraints that the economy has in terms of stimulating local demand. Looking at the recovery is really going to be based on stimulating demand. And I think that one of the things that really has to come through in this budget is the issue of local procurement for public procurement, because I think we need to create a capacity for locally generated revenue to become a revolving fund to stimulate the productive sectors. So if we make it mandatory for all public procurement in this whole season of recovery to be done locally and to be done through buying from local manufacturers, then we are able to inject some demand into the local manufacturers, which will again
increase
jobs and address, without necessarily injecting money for productive sector, for the productive sector, which money we don't really have. So that is one of the key asks that we have. And the second is that we really, I think that if the budget can afford sustained stability and an enabling business environment, it would have done us a very, very big favor by providing the space where industry can begin or can continue, because we are already actually seeing some signs of recovery in some subsectors or in some companies, and that needs to be sustained. But local procurement is our biggest core.
That's the one, yeah. Local procurement. Instead of just importing all of our products, I mean, over $4 or $5 billion US dollars worth of imports into the country. It's just not sustainable.
No.
It's unfortunate we have lost Washington Jakarta from the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Climate and Rural Settlement. It would be interesting to have got his take on what his ministry would have liked to put into the budget, and I'm sure I'm going to hunt that down, because it would be interesting to me to see what can be put into 2021 budget. Well, we have come to the end of our program for this afternoon. You have been watching The Mint Extra. Our discussion today, International Day for Poverty Eradication, acting together to achieve social and environmental justice for all. I'd like to thank our panelists, Georges van Montfort, UNDP resident representative, Zakai Kuvarika, CEO of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, Reverend Taylor Nyanhete, National Director, Zimbabwe National Council for the Welfare of Children, and of course we were joined virtually by Washington Jakata, Director of Climate Change, Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Climate and Rural Resettlement. Thank you very much for appearing on the Mint Extra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV network, ZTN, and of course our partners, the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, PRFT, and the United Nations. Well, that's it from me this afternoon. All that's left to say is, I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and you all be safe.